Chapter 8 Off the Record. By noon, Elise was wrapped in white, cream silk blouse, high-waisted slacks, hair pinned into a halo bun her mother would approve of. The look was flawless. The performance? Less so. She hadn't slept much. The FaceTime video still haunted her phone and her mind. She hadn't heard back from Amara, and Malik had texted again. Soft, sincere, unsure. She hadn't replied. There wasn't time. The installation planning committee meeting was at 12:30 sharp. The who's who of Kingdom Light Ministries and half the Black Christian establishment in the region would be there. Board members, city officials, elders, wives of other bishops, even one senator's wife who claimed to have prayed Elise into existence. Her mother had called twice to remind her, "This meeting sets the tone. You're not just a pastor, you're a brand." Now, seated in her Range Rover outside the administrative wing of the church, Elise watched the tinted glass doors ahead and counted the breaths it would take to smile all the way through. 5. She would give them 5. She stepped out, heels clicking in time with the silence between her thoughts. A junior staff member waved politely and opened the door for her. "They're already inside, Pastor Elise." The title still felt like a borrowed coat. She entered the conference room to a dozen upright bodies rising in reverence. Someone pulled out her chair. A tray of coffee, flavored creamer, fruit, and finger sandwiches filled the air with a comfort she wouldn't taste. Her mother, Geneva, was already seated at the head of the table. "Good afternoon, everyone," Elise said smoothly, placing her phone face down and folding her hands. "Let's begin." The meeting opened with a prayer and rolled into logistics. Everything from the venue options for the installation ceremony, church or city hall, to the attire for her First Lady season was discussed like a wedding plan. "Daughter," Bishop Camden Pierce leaned in, "you have grace on your life that stretches beyond the pulpit. I see it. The people see it. But this installation will be a public covenant, not just a calling. So let's discuss alignment of optics, expectations, and partners." Elise blinked. "I'm sorry?" Geneva smiled tightly. "He means Malik." The room shifted. Some nods, a few expectant stares. "Now, I'm not one to rush romance," said Elder Mona Carter, though she absolutely was. "But your father's condition is worsening. It would be healing for him and for the people to see his daughter take her place, whole, settled, covered." Elise's throat tightened. "I'm not engaged." "But you could be," Geneva said without blinking. "He's shown commitment, he's respected, and he's willing." The silence wasn't empty. It was curated. Everyone in that room had already agreed. She was the last to arrive, not just to the meeting, but to the decision. "Has a date been discussed?" someone asked, clipboard ready. Right then, the door swung open. Malik strolled in carrying a pink and white box from Savannah's Sugar Table, the city's favorite gourmet donut spot. "Not yet," he said with a grin, setting the box on the table. "But good things take time, right?" Laughter rippled through the room. Someone clapped. A few cooed like it was confirmation. Elise blinked at him, stunned, but managed to produce a smile. It didn't reach her eyes. He kissed her on the cheek in front of everyone. Light, gentle, perfectly placed. Geneva beamed. The performance was complete. When the meeting ended, Elise didn't excuse herself. She simply vanished. She slipped down the corridor behind the pulpit exit and entered the small private restroom near the choir room. Locking the door behind her, she leaned over the counter, breath shaky, palms gripping the porcelain like it could save her. Her reflection stared back, foundation flawless, lashes curled, gloss unmoved, but her eyes fractured. She wasn't sure what broke her more, the feeling of being auctioned off in a sacred room, or the fact that Malik didn't seem to mind. The knock startled her. "Elise, it's me." Malik's voice was gentle, muffled by the door. She hesitated, then cracked it open. He stepped inside, closing it softly behind him. "You okay?" he asked. She shook her head. "No." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, not pushing, just present. "You didn't have to do all that in there," she whispered. "I know. They already treat this like a coronation and a wedding proposal. You walking in like a damn knight with pastries." He held up his hands. "Okay, fair. That was a little much." She looked at him harder now. "But let me ask you something." He nodded. "Did my mother tell you to show up at my house last night? With the roses, the wine, the gift?" He blinked, then smiled faintly. "No." "You're sure?" "I was terrified to do that, actually. First time I ever went rogue. Your mom didn't approve that gesture. Your admin was off duty," he teased gently, "but I loved the way it turned out." Something in Elise eased. She exhaled fully, like her ribs had been tight for hours. She stepped forward, wrapped her arms around his waist, and laid her head against his chest. He didn't flinch. He just held her. It wasn't fireworks, but it was real. A steady, quiet warmth she hadn't known she needed. Maybe he wasn't the answer. But right now, he was an anchor. There was a knock on the outer door. Geneva. Elise rolled her eyes as Malik opened the door. Her mother didn't even pretend to wait. "Your father wants dinner," she said without missing a beat. "Both of you." "Now?" Elise asked. "Now," Geneva said, as if it had been on the calendar. Malik glanced at Elise. She shrugged. "Then let's eat," she said, forcing a smile. They walked the corridor side by side, not touching, not speaking, but for once, it didn't feel forced. The Montgomery estate had a way of silencing noise, both the external and the internal kind. The lighting was warm, the silverware gleamed, and Bishop Elijah Montgomery, though thinner than ever, sat upright at the head of the table, like royalty presiding over a final blessing. Elise slipped into the seat beside him, Malik settling beside her. The family chef had prepared seared salmon with lemon risotto, roasted asparagus with Parmesan curls, and a basket of freshly baked rosemary rolls that made the whole house smell like purpose. They ate. For a while, the conversation was light. Geneva asking about campaign donors and outreach efforts, Malik complimenting the risotto like a man trying to win a cook's favor. But soon the bishop cleared his throat. "I want to talk about Portugal." Elise paused, fork halfway to her mouth, her face pained, but she kept the reason silent for now. "I've already confirmed that we'll send a small team ahead of your installation, Chio," he said. "Some preaching, some diplomacy. Elise will lead it, and I think it would be good for Malik to accompany her." Malik wiped his hands with his napkin and sat up straighter. "Bishop, I'd love to go, truly, but I absolutely cannot accept you paying my way." Geneva arched a brow. "It's not a payment. It's—" "I understand," Malik said gently, cutting her off. Then his eyes moved to Elise. "But she's the reward, and I'll do whatever I have to, financially, spiritually, personally, to be worthy of her. I'd rather earn her hand than have it gifted." Elise blinked. She expected herself to recoil, but instead, she warmed up. His words didn't feel manipulative. They felt real and brave. He interrupted Geneva without hesitation, and the effect on Elise was immediate. Heat unfurled beneath her skin, subtle but undeniable. She hated how much she liked it. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I want you to go," she said. "I think the time away will do us some good." Her father nodded thoughtfully. "That's wise, especially before the installation ceremony." Elise added, "And when the meetings and the retreats are over, I'm going to stay behind for a few extra days. I need a tiny vacation from all of this, just to clear my mind." Malik turned to her, surprised but grinning. "I'd be delighted. Let me go find a flight," Geneva interjected smoothly, sipping her wine. "No need. I always book an extra seat when Elise travels. Flexibility is key." Elise gave her mother a side glance, half gratitude, half suspicion. But she let it go. Geneva raised her glass. "Maybe we'll come back with a proposal." They all followed, lifting their glasses. Even the bishop smiled, albeit tiredly. Later in the car, Elise's phone buzzed. "Amara Brooks, I can see you before I leave, but it'll need to be tomorrow, 3 p.m. Let me know if that works." A B. Elise stared at the message. Her fingers hovered over the reply. So much could happen in 24 hours. She typed, "Confirmed. See you tomorrow." Then she exhaled and drove. But Portugal was a weight in her soul. Suddenly, she wasn't 35 years old sitting beneath crystal chandeliers. She was 16. Rain pressed softly against the tall windows of the Montgomery estate, turning the world outside into blurred streaks of silver. Geneva's office had always felt colder than the rest of the house, not because of the temperature, because every decision made there carried the weight of permanence. 16-year-old Elise stood in the center of the room, hands trembling against the skirt of her church dress. It was the same navy dress she'd worn that morning to youth service. She hadn't changed. She hadn't thought to. Across from her, Geneva Montgomery sat behind an immaculate mahogany desk. Perfect posture, perfect makeup, perfect composure. Between them lay a single white pregnancy test. Positive. Elise's face was swollen from hours of crying. Geneva studied the test for another moment before finally lifting her eyes to her daughter. "How far along are you?" The question wasn't sharp. It wasn't even emotional. It sounded almost clinical. Elise swallowed. I don't know." A slight nod. Nothing more. "Does he know?" Elise stared at the floor. Silence answered for her. Geneva closed her eyes for exactly one measured breath before opening them again. "No." The word landed like the closing of a vault. "Mama, no." Not louder, simply impossible to argue with. Tears blurred Elise's vision. "I love him." Geneva rose from her chair with deliberate grace and walked around the desk. "You are 16. She stopped inches away. "You don't love him." Elise looked up, wounded. "You love being noticed." Another step. "You love feeling chosen." Closer still. "You love that for the first time in your life someone looked at you as a girl instead of a ministry assignment." The word struck with surgical precision. Every one of them found its mark. "That's not fair," Elise whispered. Geneva's expression didn't change. "Neither is the world." The room fell silent except for the rain tapping against the windows. Then Geneva's voice softened. So much softer it almost sounded like comfort. "Baby." She reached up and brushed damp curls away from Elise's face. "This isn't a child." Her hand lingered against her daughter's cheek. "Not yet." A pause. "This is a consequence trying to become tomorrow's headline." Elise stepped backward as though she'd been slapped. "What if?" Her voice cracked. What if God gave me this baby? For the first time, something hardened inside Geneva's eyes. Do not use God to defend your fear. The words hung between them, heavy, final. Geneva turned and walked toward the window. Your father has spent decades building something larger than this family. She looked out at the rain, a church that feeds people, a ministry that employs families, a legacy that reaches far beyond these walls. Then she faced Elise again. You think this affects only you? Elise couldn't answer. It affects your father, the congregation, the board, the donors, the city. It affects the future you haven't even begun to understand. Tears streamed down Elise's face. He didn't do anything wrong. A flicker crossed Geneva's face. No. She nodded once. He didn't. Then came the sentence Elise would carry for the rest of her life. He simply wasn't built to survive standing beside you. The next morning, the city bustled outside the tinted windows of the family car as though nothing had happened. Students hurried toward school. Parents rushed to work. Coffee shops opened. Traffic lights changed. The world continued. Inside the back seat, time had stopped. Elise sat beside her mother in her pressed school uniform, fingers twisting together until her knuckles turned white. Geneva rested a leather folder across her lap. Neither spoke for several blocks. Finally, can I call him? No. Please, no. Elise turned toward the window before the tears could return. Buildings passed in blurred silence, one after another, one after another. Without looking away from the road ahead, Geneva finally spoke. One day. Her voice was almost gentle. You'll understand. Elise didn't answer. I didn't take your life from you. A long silence followed. I gave it back. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and fresh paint. Everything was white. The walls, the floors, the uniforms. Even the silence felt white. Geneva completed paperwork at the reception desk with the same steady handwriting she used to sign church documents and charitable donations. Across the room, Elise sat alone, arms wrapped tightly around herself, as though she could somehow disappear inside her own body. A nurse stepped into the waiting room. Elise Montgomery? Nothing. Elise? She couldn't move. Not because she didn't hear, because moving would make everything real. You've just listened to Chapter 8 of The Bishop's Daughter by Lee Franklin. Thanks, and we will see you soon.